when we look at the Old Testament, the Old Covenant, and the New Covenant, it's not just a bunch of laws that God gave that we had to follow. It was an agreement that God made. So it wasn't just do this, do this, do this. It says, if you do this, then I will do that. If you do this, then I will do that. So Abraham established a covenant with God. So Abraham and God made an agreement. And then 430 years later, God gave Moses the law to enforce the covenant. It says, for if the inheritance is based on law, it is no longer based on a promise. But God has granted it to Abraham by means of a promise. So God said he would reward them with prosperity if they followed the law. But Paul is saying, well, God made a promise to Abraham, and he said that his heirs would be blessed. And so the blessing was based on a promise, not based on following the law. So the covenant he made with Abraham was a promise. He said, I'm going to bless it wasn't if you do this and do that and do this. So he's saying, well, if it's based on the law, then it's not based on a promise. So the law came 433 years after the covenant with Abraham. So then how can we reconcile that? So verse 23 says, before the coming of this faith, we were held in custody under the law, locked up until the faith was to come would be revealed. So the law was our guardian until Christ came, that we might be justified by faith. Now that this faith has come, we're no longer under the guardian. So he's talking about the inheritance of Abraham. So like if you have rich parents and they leave you a ton of money, but you're 4 years old, you're not going to be allowed to just go and spend the money. You're going to have a guardian to look over you until you become of age. So Paul is saying the law was that guardian for us. So God promised an inheritance, but the law was the guardian that said when we got the blessings and when we didn't get the blessings. But then he says, now that this faith has come, now that Jesus has come, we're no longer under a guardian. And we also saw that Jesus allowed us to be descendants of Abraham and eligible for the blessings promised to Abraham. So we're eligible for the blessings of Abraham. So we're able to be blessed and we're able to have prosperity. But if we look at the Old Testament blessings and the New Testament blessings, we see that Jesus' blessings were different than the Old Testament blessings. So, for example, if we look at Luke 6:20-21, it says, in turning his gaze to the disciples, he began to say, so in the Old Testament blessings were, you get cattle, you get livestock, you get, but Jesus said, blessed are the poor, for yours is the kingdom of God. Blessed are you who hunger now, for you will be satisfied. Blessed are you who weep, for you shall laugh. So in the Old Testament, you're blessed if you had a bunch of cattle and you have but Jesus said you're blessed if you're poor. He says you're blessed if you're hungry. You're blessed if you're crying. So the Old Testament blessings centered around prosperity on earth and inheriting the promised land. But New Testament blessings center around inheriting the kingdom of God and living in eternity with Jesus and blessings that are stored up in heaven. So instead of describing wealth and possessions as God's blessing, the New Testament warns us that we should not be too attached to things of the world. Although we should gratefully receive and joyfully celebrate God's good gifts, the abundance of food, the warm clothes, the comfortable homes, we should be happy that we have them and grateful that we have them.
Right.
But we shouldn't make the mistake that thinking that these gifts are God's blessings in our lives. According to the New Testament, God's blessing is a deeply spiritual reality. It comes to those who receive Him in humble faith. It's a spiritual blessing. Our poverty or our prosperity is not an indication of whether God is blessing us necessarily.
Yeah.
So we could still be receiving blessings from God in poverty. So it's not wrong to have prosperity. Matthew 6:33 says, "But seek first the kingdom of God and His righteousness, and all these things will be added to you."
Yes.
But when we link God's blessings to our prosperity, we're in danger of concluding that God is pleased with us as individuals based on our bank accounts or our material possessions. So prosperity might be a gift from God, but it's not necessarily the only sign of God's blessing.